Barlow here. I was talking to a student recently who said they haven't been home for very much for 2 or 3 years, and now they're home. They're starting to realize that their mom is actually valuable. So I thought, that's great, Mother's Day is coming up, so maybe I'll teach you how to make a chocolate cake so you can show your mom how valuable she is.
It felt sort of targeted at me, but okay.
So behind the camera is my daughter, who's determined to edit this into something that makes me look bad. So this is going to be a battle of the wits as we go forward. Okay, easy chocolate cake. You don't have to know how to bake in order to do this. First thing you need to do, and I'll show you the whole recipe at the end. First thing you do is check that you have all the ingredients. You need cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder. Dutch process is best. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Regular white sugar, salt, flour, baking soda, vanilla, some neutral tasting oil like canola oil, 2 eggs, and the eggs really need to be room temperature, and some freshly brewed coffee. It's got to be fresh because it's got to be really hot. So check that you have all your ingredients. Then set your oven, I already did this, for 350. And it really has to preheat for a full 20 minutes, even if your light goes off before that, because it's not really an even temperature until about 20 minutes have passed. You also need a couple of 8-inch cake pans. 8 inches across. If you have 9-inch, that's okay. And if you don't have round cake pans, a 13 by 9, which is like that, you can substitute with that. You need to line it with paper. So this is a piece of parchment paper that I've doubled over. You could also use wax paper if that's what you have. But draw a circle. Cut just a little bit inside the circle so that it'll fit inside the bottom of your pan. This is the part that you can speed up, Jordan, when you edit. Doesn't have to be perfect. Then you need to grease it. Room temperature butter is the best thing to do this with, but if you need to use oil because your butter is too cold or you don't have butter, that's okay too. Give it a pretty good grease bottom and sides. Put your circle in. See on the bottom there? And then put a little more butter to grease the top of that paper as well. And if it creases just a little bit, that's fine, but make sure it goes back down flat. Then, take some of your flour and just tap it around. Make sure you get all the sides so it's greased and floured. Perfect. And then do the same thing with your second one. All right, now for the fun part. But first, I have to blow my nose. Always wash your hands after you blow your nose when you're making food, and any time.
A few moments later.
Now, we need a half a cup of Dutch processed cocoa. Dutch processed cocoa is very much like regular unsweetened cocoa, except it's been treated with an alkalizing agent, so it's not acidic, which means it behaves a little bit differently. If all you have is regular unsweetened cocoa, that's better than nothing. But Dutch process is definitely good for flavor and texture in the case of a cake. So I just spooned it in. It's a half a cup. Put it in a medium-sized bowl. A cup and a half of sugar. With dry ingredients, you want to use a cup where the 1 cup mark is, you can do flat right across the top. In a liquid measure, the 1 cup mark is below the top, so that's not as good for dry ingredients. Cup and a half of sugar. So I can just kind of shake it down to get to the cup and a half mark. A teaspoon of salt. I'm not going to pour this over this in case I miss. I'll end up with too much salt, so I'm going to do it over the sink. This is fine sea salt. Regular plain old salt is good too. Okay, 1 3/4 flour. Measuring flour is where you really got to be careful. If you just do this, right now it looks kind of like 2/3 of a cup. And if I shake it down, which is what a lot of people do, it's a 1/2 cup, but it's the same amount of flour. All I did is shake it. So you don't want to do that. In order to get a consistent measurement, you just spoon it gently into the cup until it overflows the top a little bit. And then you just scrape across the top to get a cup. 3/4. I'm just going up to that third line there. And I'm going to do the equivalent of scraping across the top. I'm not packing it in. I'm just sort of lightly getting it there. And then a teaspoon of baking soda. Make sure it's baking soda and not baking powder. I'm going to whisk all that stuff together. And the reason to do this is so that when you add the liquid ingredients to the dry, which has the flour in it, you'll have to stir it as little as possible to get it to mix. Because once the flour's in there and once it's wet, you don't want it to develop gluten. Because you're not making bread, you don't want it to be tough and stretchy. You want it to be as light as possible. And this is just regular all-purpose flour. All right. In a different bowl, I'm going to have 2 teaspoons vanilla. Vanilla is a good way to enhance the flavor of chocolate. So this cake is all about the flavor. You want that chocolate to taste as rich and yummy as possible. 1/2 cup of neutral tasting oil. I've got canola oil. You can use vegetable oil. You can use corn oil if that's what you have. I'm getting right down level with it to make sure it's the right amount. And then 1.5 cups of freshly brewed coffee, or if you don't have coffee, boiling water. It's got to be hot, whatever you're using. The coffee helps with depth of flavor for the chocolate, but if you're using boiling water, the heat is what releases the flavor in the cocoa powder. And this is strong coffee. So I'm going to make a little well in the center of the dry ingredients. And I'm going to add these. And the baking soda is going to activate a little bit with the coffee. I'm going to stir as little as possible. And then the eggs, which are room temperature so that they'll behave properly. They just need to be lightly whisked. Use a whisk if you've got it, otherwise a fork is just fine. And then I'm going to add that in here. It's a very runny batter. And you want to do it as evenly as you can. Eyeball it if you have to, or if you have a scale, you can do it that way too. When I preheated the oven, I made sure that I had a rack just at the bottom of the upper third of the oven. And now I'm going to put these pans in and I'm going to offset them a little bit so that they get maximum air circulation around them. And I'm gonna set the timer for 25 minutes. And then we wait.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
All right. Clean toothpick. See, it's clean. And it springs back up. And it's pulled away just the tiniest bit from the edge. So we're going to put it on a rack and let them thoroughly cool. A couple hours.
More moments later.
Frosting, super easy way to make icing that tastes good. And you don't have to have any skill. You need a half a cup of butter, which is 1 stick, a teaspoon of vanilla, which I already put in there, a pound of confectioner's sugar, and be careful you don't get it all over the place, and then 3 to 4 tablespoons of milk. 4 tablespoons is 1/4 cup. If all you have is that 1 pound of confectioner's sugar, you got to be really careful not to put too much liquid in. So start with about half of it, and be really careful you don't send your confectioner's sugar flying. If you have one of these things, definitely use it. See, I'm going to need more. Takes out. Take a knife that doesn't have any teeth on it and run it around the edge. Make a big surface area out of the palm of your hand and tip this out and very carefully pull that paper off and then put it on a very flat plate. The flatter the better. And I'm going to show you a super easy way to frost without having to have any skill. So dump a whole bunch of frosting right on top and then just take it just up to the edges. I'm pushing with the middle of my knife, and it's going to be thicker at the edges than in the middle because the cake is domed. I'm pushing ahead of the knife all the way to the edge so it'll peek out. All right, get your other cake out. Same thing all over again. And if you have some strawberries or raspberries or some other kind of good looking fruit, you can put some of those around the edges or slice them up and put them on top. There you go.
Have anything to say as an outro?
What are we gonna do with this? We just had a chocolate cake.